Dig deeper into that and understand how we're going to be affected by this upcoming budget reading. Over to you, Abby.
All right, Trix, a lot to expect, as you've rightly put it, and it's a big day for Ambassador Attani, who will be tabling his last budget as Treasury Cabinet Secretary in that docket. Having served for 3 years, what will he be offering this afternoon? In a few hours from now, he'll be tabling this year's budget, and it will be interesting to see what will be the main theme around this budget, considering that it comes, as you've indicated there, Trix, that it's a transitional budget where it's like an election year budget, which will be seeing a new administration taking over office. And the budget numbers have, of course, been increasing over the years. We've seen a trajectory towards increased spending by the Jubilee administration. We'll be dissecting through the 9 years in office that President Uhuru Kenyatta has led the country. And we are delighted to have with us a very rich panel this afternoon to help us get some more perspectives into this. And remember, we'll be taking you live again to Parliament, as well as reactions from across the country in regard to what are the people saying in relation to this year's budget. And of course, our teams that are handling our various platforms, from the digital platforms, they are also on standby to just get your comments, get your feedback on what are your expectations. And remember, this continues on KTN News. For now, we release our viewers on KTN Home, but we ask them to still stay with us here on KTN News. And of course, one of the big conversations in today's Standard, we have the second main story in the paper. This is being the 3.3 trillion shilling budget coming in at a time where Kenyans are grappling with a high cost of living, and a lot of conversations around this, Trix. And of course, we will be taking you through some of the numbers with our various analysts who are with us here. Let me straight on jump into introducing our panelists this afternoon, and I'm really excited to have you on board. And we have with us Mr. Makori, the man from ISPAC, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants. In accounting, they call him FCPA, if I'm not wrong. Yes, thank you, sir, for making time to join us. We're also delighted to have with us Ken Gishinga, the Chief Economist at Mentoria. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We'll also be speaking with Bill Okero, who is a public policy expert as well as a former Mandera senator. And he also had a big role in Parliament when it came to matters to do with finance, and of course a lot to expect. But gentlemen, let me start with you, Mr. Makori. Of course, this is a trillion shilling budget, 3.3 trillion. Let's just debunk the myth. What can 3.3 trillion shilling do? What does it look like, assuming you are to line it up from Thika Road to Mombasa Road? How big is this budget?
It's as big as you can imagine it, and it's as little that as you can imagine, depending on how you look, where you're looking at it from. I think maybe just be able to dive into the budget itself is that the budget has been split into two, development and recurrent.
Sure.
Recurrent is for the day-to-day expenditure for the government, both national and county governments. And then 600 billion to be able to create infrastructure and related services. So we more or less talking about 2.7 that is going to go down into expenditures, which the biggest expenditure is on repayment of debt, the 953 billion. This is just interest alone.
Wow.
We are not talking about the principal repayment. We're just servicing our interest on those loans. And then the bulk of it then goes to expenditure and then goes to the various line ministries. And with this, I mean, there have been increases and downsizing of budgets across. Not forgetting that judiciary also has a stake in that, which is very minimal, 0.6% of the entire budget, because it's the other arm of government, and then being able to have 370 billion go to the county governments. So that's in a nutshell, the breakdown of the 3.3 trillion budget.
All right.
But then, as I said, it's as big as how you look at it. It's a small. It will depend on how you looking at it from what perspective. From the county government's perspective, they tell you 370 billion might not be enough to be able to cater for all their functions.
Sure.
And clearly knowing that some of those functions are still at the national government and they've never been devolved down to the county governments and still have to play that role. Looking at it from even the expenditure from the national government side, I think one of the issues that has never been talked about is pension, and a majority of the civil service is actually retiring. Mm-hmm. And we extended the retirement age to 60 years, but 60 years is catching up with us. Mm-hmm. I think from last year, 2020, thereabouts. Yeah. We've had civil servants retire. I mean, what we've seen all through is that, and if you look at the report from the National Treasury, they've not been able to meet the obligation in terms of being able to pay pension. And if you look at the previous financial year, they had a deficit of 1.2 billion. This year, they're just reporting a 1.1 billion. Mm-hmm. And if we continue increasing this, it means that as the aging population comes out to be able to get their pension, then it means those are also going to get into a position where they cannot sustain themselves in the economy, but also being able to facilitate the economy from growing.
All right. And Gishinga, for you, this year's budget comes at a very critical stage where we are literally coming out of a pandemic. At the same time, we are staring at another election cycle, which, as we've seen across the years through the trends, any election year, we see economic activity sort of dampen a bit. From your standpoint, what will be the key messaging in this year's budget from Ambassador Attani?
It is a critical time. As you said, it's a post-pandemic budget. And obviously, we also have the Russia-Ukraine crisis playing out behind the scenes. And even here locally, as you've said, you have the elections. I think the big lessons over the last 3 years is that supply chains can be disrupted. And our ability to continuously import has to be reduced. We import, 80% of our wheat. So I think the CS should be really thinking about, can we start producing these things locally? So I want to see what the allocation on agriculture is. There's that subsidy for fertilizer. But I think the underlying philosophy and hope for today is that Kenya needs to start importing less and start producing more in the country.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And gentlemen, I'd like us to look at some numbers now, because it would be unfair for us to not remember what was last year's budget looking like. And of course, last year's budget was a bit higher compared to this year's budget. Last year's budget was standing at 3.6 trillion shillings. And this was a budget that had also a substantial deficit. And this year's budget is at 3.31 trillion. So this is how the budget numbers were looking like for the 2021-2022 fiscal year. Apologies for that typo on the year up there. But these budgets are coming in with huge deficits, where we are seeing, for instance, in this year's budget, the Treasury targets to raise about 2.14 trillion shillings. And it will be quite a big jump compared to what we saw last year. And gentlemen, I'd like to hear from you, CPA Makori, in regards to the fiscal deficit. We've seen the government taking on a very interesting stance, saying that they're moving towards concessional borrowing. This is sort of more of a good option compared to commercial financing, which had a big dent. And you rightly put it that our interest payments, staggering figures that you did mention. Perhaps what might we see being done differently as regards to this year's deficit, especially for the incoming government?
Little that will happen in the short term, but maybe towards the long term, that might make an impact. I mean, even as we are right now, even as we talk about the 953 billion, remember that the commercial loans and even the bilateral donors had given a concession, a moratorium for the repayment of those particular loans from way last year to, I mean, it's just kicking in, I think, in September of this year.
Yeah.
So we're just seeing ourselves getting into a position where we'll be forced to be able to repay the loans.
All right.
So it's not going to be able to offer any relief as such in terms of the loans that are going to be paid. But it's a good idea. That's where we should have started.
Okay.
To have concessional loans and being able to borrow with long-term loans rather than the short-term loans that we have, so that we are able to have, I mean, lesser repayment of both interest and principal. But as it is, we went commercial. We have the Eurobond and many other commercial loans that we have.
Correct.
And even borrowing from the domestic markets, borrowing from you and me, has not helped the situation at all. And therefore that means at some point those loans become and have to mature, and most of them will be maturing from the next financial year.
So what does this mean to the common man, seeing a government that is having an insatiable appetite to borrow at the expense of the basic needs that they contend with, from the high cost of fuel, the high cost of maize flour, cost of healthcare, and the list goes on?
There's a lot of balancing act to it's not just for the government itself or not to the common man. I mean, government borrows for a reason. Either to be able to finance infrastructure or be able to finance its own operations. And we can actually agree that what we've collected as revenue from taxes has never matched as such to our expenditure for a very long period of time. I think the only person who managed almost to be able to match this is in Kibaki's era. But subsequently, we've been able to see that revenue raised is not measurable to the expenditure at any given period. So what that means to the common man is that the government must be able to have new or explore revenue-raising measures.
So this means more taxes to the mwananchi?
Impliedly, yes.
Yes.
To the common man, that we'll have to embrace ourselves to more taxes, and unless up until when there's physical discipline, which simply means rationalization of the expenditures, and being able to have a leaner budget that then matches out with the revenues, it will mean that the other source is either we borrow or we pay more taxes.
All right.
Yeah.
And Gishinga, listening to CPA Makori, of course, the pulse of the people is quite potent at this moment. We've seen border operators claiming that they want the cost of food items to be reconsidered in this year's budget. We've also seen from that earlier report on the Mwananchi hurdles and the hardship that they are forced to contend with. What would be the ideal tax measures, perhaps, especially when it comes to an economy that is currently enduring high commodity prices? What options does the minister have, especially looking at the larger mass? Will this be a poor man's budget, or it remains to be a rich man's budget?
Well, I think potent is an understatement. The anger is palpable, and it's important that the budget starts addressing the issues of Kenyans. I was looking at the first budget from 1964 by James Gishuru, and there was hopes, there's that idea that a new Kenya was coming up, and liberty and freedom. When you think about the budget making cycle today, people feel there's a disconnect, that it doesn't necessarily look at raising the standards of living. I think a few things need to happen. We really need to look at VAT. VAT is really creating issues in the market. at 16%. I think they need to start cushioning Kenyans by looking at, can we reduce it to 14% and start broadening that base to be able to at least ease those measures. When you look at excise tax, for example, excise tax used to be one of those taxes that used to discourage particular habits, but now the excise tax of today has become a way of collecting revenue for funding government. It's no longer serving the purpose that it used to be. So it goes back to that topic we discuss almost every week on looking at our tax policy. Is our tax policy speaking to raising productivity? Is it speaking to raising the standards of living of Kenyans? Because the more people feel disconnected from this process, the more they feel that this is just a process that in the calendar, but that does not necessarily speak to their well-being.
All right. Well, we are also keeping an eye on what's happening at the National Treasury, where our teams are on standby. Of course, we have Brenda Kerubo, Brian George Otieno, Noah Kipkemboi in Parliament, as well as Duncan Haemba. We do understand that the Treasury CS is making the final touches before he begins his way to Parliament, and we'll be covering for you the developments from Treasury, and perhaps as we progress, we'll be showing you some live pictures from Treasury. But gentlemen, let's expound the conversation, because the bigger question for the common man right now is how will CS Attani offer relief to Kenyans who are really impacted by the cost of living? And for you, CPM Makori, walk us through, there are big concerns around our taxation from the income tax at 30%. We've seen other layers of taxes being introduced over time, from the digital tax. We've seen a host of other tax issues coming up, especially that have crippled some of the enterprises in the country. Perhaps what would be some of the remedies around the tax policies that the government should be taking on? Have we left out the big boys to be operating without the rightful taxes? Or is the government coming too hard on the common man, because these are the easy targets?
Well, it's a good question that you've asked, and maybe to be able to respond to that, first is be able to look at why does government have to be able to tax. I mean, look at it, because the budget is read by first setting out what our expenditure will be, and then how we're going to raise money to be able to finance that. I think what has, and we have seen it all through, is the ballooning wage bill, the issues of corruption that we need to be able to deal with. There's basically, as Ken said, 80% of our products are imported, and therefore it means any shocks in the dollar and even in the oil prices and coming back home, because most of our manufacturing industries must be able to use fuel at some point, it will have an effect on prices. In terms of revenue raising measures, I mean, we've just asked the people who pay taxes are small population as compared to those who are actually meant to be able to pay the taxes. We have almost 4.5 million Kenyans who pay and file taxes. The tax base should be at around 11.7 million. So 4.5 million Kenyans are actually shouldering 47 million Kenyans. One of the measures is just to be able to see how then do we expand the tax base to be able to have more people come in to be able to pay taxes, and that is a way that they'll be able to raise money. I think the other thing that the government has focused on is on the digital tax for those, and most of the youth and businesses have gone digital to be able to advertise, sell their products, and even transact online. So that is going to be one of those areas that, I mean, they'll be able to derive revenue from. But that means a constant data analysis to be able to see which businesses are in the digital space, and being able to show that all those businesses are able to pay taxes.
Okay.
Is one of those measures. As much as we have the digital service tax, it's raised revenue, yes, but you just get in the first cohort into the bracket. But now, how to expand that? They'll have to be able to think beyond the current measures that they're putting in to be able to net out digital businesses. I think the other measure that we'll have to be able to look at, and critically so, is on the SMEs. 11 million SMEs employing over 14 million Kenyans, having 70% into providing, inputting 70% into the economy. That's huge. Mm-hmm. And you'll realize that even as you speak to those, 98% of those SMEs are one or two. They employ one or two people to be able to work within their premises or for whatever business that they're carrying out. So what that means is that KRA needs to be able to have a way of bringing all these people and pay taxes and have a simple way.
They're targeting to raise 300 billion in new tax revenue, over and above what KRA is already failing to meet in its annual targets. How will they be able to raise another 300 billion?
For me, I'm just looking at it in terms of being able to go for the traditional taxpayers, and being able to have further analysis into that, and being able to ensure that they increase their efficiency with those taxpayers, and being able to open up new tax base or taxpayers. One is the digital space, which we know that is going to be able to maybe raise additional, as I said, 120 billion. The 180, maybe with VAT coming in, an excess duty, which has also increased from what was there last year of 169. Now it is 295 billion or something like that, to be able to raise from excess tax. And as I said, excess tax is meant to be able to deter consumption of some goods and services. But now it has become a form of being able to raise taxes.
The sin taxes.
The sin taxes.
All right. Gishinga, I see you nodding your head profusely at this point.
I actually take a different view from CPM Akori. I think we need to fundamentally change our tax structure. If you look at any country where there are devolved units, whether it's the US or Australia, the devolved units, the counties, that's where the primary generation of revenues. So for us, the counties should actually be the hub. It's the counties that collect the property rates, the land rates. And in all those countries, it's the land rates that looks at service delivery. So if you think of Kisumu right now, Kisumu is just starting to contemplate collecting land rates right now, and it's been a city for a while. So it tells you our structure is wrong. The county needs to be the hub, so that the national government can only look at things that truly cover the national government. But if we have a strong county revenue generation, then the national government will have a much easier way moving forward.
All right. Indeed, interesting insights there. And of course, we continue the wall-to-wall coverage of this year's budget, 2022-2023. We have some live pictures coming out of the National Treasury, where this is the center of focus this afternoon as Kenyans wait for the man of the hour. And this is Ambassador Attani. He will be exiting from the offices here at the National Treasury, Our team of reporters are keeping standby there. And of course, as is tradition, he will be stepping out with the ceremonial briefcase symbolizing the national budget being in the briefcase, which has the coat of arms. And of course, he'll be, accompanied by the principal secretary as well as the administrative cabinet secretary. And of course, all this will be culminating with him proceeding to Parliament. Will he be taking a walk to Parliament in light of the current state of affairs in the economy? Will he be driving to Parliament? We'll be keeping our eyes open to just see how this pans out. Well, of course, a lot of expectations from various quarters across the country and, of course, beyond. And gentlemen, the other big conversation in this budget is the equation around the big four. The president will be serving, he's actually serving his last term in office. We've consistently seen concerted efforts towards allocations going heavy on these sectors, from affordable housing, manufacturing, there's the issue of food security and universal health care. And being a transition year, what are your expectations, especially when it comes to how will the CS manage to ensure that the projects that are ongoing do not stall, and in equal measure having sort of a critical balancing act to ensure that whoever takes over office, whichever of the coalitions that forms government, that there is continuity in the government projects, especially looking at the heavy infrastructure projects that have been under the big four. And what is your take on this, CP Makori?
Just being able to look at the challenge that Attani has to be able to look at the big four. And if you look at just the numbers that have been given
sorry
out,
to interject. We can see the CS there ready in his office. We'll be getting your thoughts as we progress. But that is Ambassador Attani, flanked by the Principal Secretary, Dr. Muya, as well as Torome Saitoti from Ministry of Planning. And these are the gentlemen who have been spending late hours into the night putting together this year's national budget. And this is a sign that in any minute from now, he'll be going all the way to Parliament to present this year's national budget. The Treasury team, they're ready and raring to go to present this year's tax and spend plans. And we are delighted to bring you those exclusive pictures from our team on the ground. Of course, cameramen keeping it posted and giving us the live action from there. CS Attani seemingly looking bright as always, and smiling and resplendent in his blue suit and the traditional red tie. And of course, he will be stepping out in a short while. And he has been the man who has transitioned Kenya from the commercial loans to the concessional loans, making a hearty laughter just in anticipation of the almost 2-hour speech that he'll be making in Parliament. And the gentlemen flanking him there, of course, have been doing the laborious task of putting the budget together. That briefcase you see just behind him has the budget speech for this year. And clearly, they are also watching us on KTN News as they are getting ready to proceed to Parliament. And of course, at the ground floor of the National Treasury, it's a beehive of activity, security beefed up, of course. CS Attani just doing the final touches, security. We can see the area has been cordoned off. We can see contingent from the GSU as well as the administration police keeping vigil there. And CS Attani has been, of course, at the helm of Treasury for 3 years. And before that, he served as the governor for Marsabit County, a man who is soft-spoken but has been punching above his weight when it comes to delivering value for money for Kenyans. Will we be able to see better tax measures this year, or or not. CS Ukur Attani there getting ready for his budget speech, and in his office at the National Treasury, a lot of activity happening this afternoon as he prepares to proceed to Parliament, where he'll be received by the speakers of the National Assembly, and thereafter he'll be ushered into the chambers where the House business will be tabled, and he'll be able to present this year's national budget. And Dr. Julius Muya, a man who has also been very instrumental in terms of crafting this budget here, as well as other technocrats, have been cracking the midnight oil, if you may say so, to just bring for us the numbers. We now want to listen in on just what the CS has to say as he gets ready for this budget.
That we've done our best, and we have presented to Kenyans the best that we can find in the circumstances that we are in now. We'll also clearly spell out to Kenyans the achievements of our government for the last 10 years. You'll see maybe our story has not been told properly. So we're also going to take this opportunity to tell our story, the major successes of our president and his government. And we have taken care of the challenges of the time, including how to deal with issues of fuel, how to deal with issues of, food security, and also as a result of the challenges of the global economy, the challenges in Eastern Europe, and the COVID, which you never know whether it's going to be a further threat. But we've taken all those assumptions in place, and I'm confident that we are presenting a budget that's reflective of the current reality, that will also portend hope for the country.
Yeah. So once you finish today, some Kenyans will be happy.
Just want to know whether they can, for every Kenyan, just want to know what will go up, how are we going to be affected? What exactly can you expect when it comes to tax matters?
Well, I don't think anything essential, anything that's going to worry Kenyans will go up. If there's going to be some modest increase in price, maybe it's not for essential goods. But we are dealing with all issues of concerns of the country, and we are going to look at it projectively and give them appropriate relief and support, because they deserve it.
So you're talking about incentives and subsidies?
Don't worry about this. We are going to, the next one now will be very important to Kenyans, and we are going to say it as it is, and we are going to place before Kenyans. We'll not let them down. We'll give them what, in our view, portends the best arrangements for the country.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just prepare. We'll catch you in the corner.
All right, CS Ukur Attani there getting ready to present this year's national budget. CS Attani giving a hint that some prices might be going up modestly, gentlemen, and Lady Trix is still with us here. And this is a rather unique access we've gotten this year into the national budget. We've seen there the Commissioner General of the Kenyan Revenue Authority, that is Mburu, or just also keeping close tabs in Parliament. And right there we are getting to hear from the CS who is going to be making his speech in about an hour's time. And of course all staff at Treasury quite excited about this big day being budget day. And gentlemen, just giving off a little from expectations towards the budget. Gishinga, he seems to be hinting at a rise in basic prices of different commodities. What do you read between the lines?
That was the sentiment I got to, and I don't think it will be very welcome by most Kenyans if the cost of living issues of the last 1 month has been anything to go by. That said, I think he's going to make the argument that Kenya has gone through a tough time with the COVID, with the crisis, and the recovery period has to take time. But one gets a sense that Kenyans are anxious. If you look at things like cost of LPG, cooking oil, these are things that are very dear. They touch the Kenyans on a daily basis. And I think that group of men in that office, I think they have to appreciate that this is just not an annual process, but they're actually real lives outside of people who might be affected. So I think there'll be some level of sensitivity that has to accompany this.
I saw CPM Makori pulling up a cheeky smile. Tell us.
I think I would agree more with Ken in terms of being able to look at it's inevitable that taxes or prices of commodities will have to go up. And I mean, looking at it and just being sincere to ourselves, COVID has been with us for the last 2 years. We're easing up, 2020, 2021, and it just started to ease up in 2022. The effects of the pandemic are still not yet fully felt. And even with that, we anticipate, because one, there was the issue of supply of goods and services, which was highly affected by COVID-19. Two is production, that both internationally and locally has been highly affected.
Yes.
The issue of being able to get vaccines took longer than expected, and therefore we have yet to get there where we have a population that we're confident that will be able to serve the economy going forward. That is a cost that has to be met, and being able to provide that particular assurance and security in terms of health. In fuel prices, Ukraine and Russia crisis is not making things any better. When you have shortage in fuel supply, that has an effect of increase in crude prices.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It means everything else, the prices have to be able to go up, and that will also mean even the price of commodities locally will have to be affected. There's been claims that, especially, just looking at food security alone, wheat and having Russia and Ukraine and being the biggest suppliers of wheat across the globe. If that alone is restricted in terms of supply, it means as Kenyans import 80% of that to be able to consume, it's not going to come at the same price that we've had in the previous financial year. And therefore, that cost must be passed on to the common man. And it's you and me who are going to bear that brunt.
All right. And listening to the CS, he also hinted that we'll also be celebrating the milestones under his watch, and all this coming at the heavy expense to Kenyans, especially many Kenyans asking the simple questions like, how did SGR benefit them? How is the expressway going to benefit them? How is LAPSET going to benefit them? And the list is on and on. And from listening to some of the key fundamental concerns is the fact that economists have held the view borrowing is not bad, but borrowing, then what does it translate to? Are the taxes working for Kenyans? Are they feeling the value of paying tax? Or are they, or is the administration creating more pressure for Kenyans to be non-compliant in a time where the taxman has been using all avenues, including indicating that they'll be monitoring our social media to follow up on our lifestyles?
You know, he said that phrase that it's time for them to tell their story. And I found that phrase very profound. In a sense, it reminded me of the State of the Union address, the State of the Nation address, where the president outlined the things that his administration has achieved. And it's important that they, for the records, are able to put this on record in terms of the infrastructure they have made. But I think there also needs to be some deep soul searching, in the sense that the private sector is where jobs can be created. And when you have high government borrowing, then you crowd out the private sector. Government can only employ maybe 700,000 people, but in a population of 55 million people, all these people have to be in the private sector. So the access to credit to private sector, the conditions for business, I think that's the part that most Kenyans have been complaining. People do agree that the economy has been growing at 5-6%. Where they disagree is that that growth has not been coming from the private sector. It's been coming from the huge infrastructure investments, which will have their benefits in the long run. But where jobs, where the Mamamboga is today, is in the private sector. And if that one is hurting, then that's a problem.
You touch a very important now, the Mamambogas, the Juakalis. I want to take our viewers live to Kisumu now, where Kevin Ogutu is standing by with Juakali operators in the lakeside city of Kisumu. Good afternoon, Ogutu. What are the sentiments of Wananchi down in the area they call Europe?
Well, thank you so much, Abby. And right here.